Howdy folks, it's GP Rogers Neil Lilly here, taking a look at the tropical update for October 7th of 2020, brought to you by the folks over there at Pine Belt Gutters and Remodeling. Outside of Delta, not much happening in the tropics, thank goodness. It's the main game in town, and now down to a wind at 85 miles an hour, gusting to 105. The Yucatan did a pretty good number on it, pressure up to 977. Moving to the northwest at 17 miles an hour. There is some indication, though, that Delta's undergoing, and has been for the last hour or two, some reorganization. It ate some dry air, obviously, interacting with land. So it's got to kind of reshuffle physics-wise. It has to kind of reshuffle things before it can get a drop in pressure and a bump up in wind. And that's what we're seeing right now as it continues to move away from the Yucatan and into the Gulf of Mexico. Inside of the cone, parts of South Mississippi, but mainly this is going to be a problem for Louisiana. The same places that had to deal with Laura are going to have to deal with Delta. Right now the forecast is still for a Category 2 at landfall with a wind in excess of 100 miles an hour, up to 105. I'll slide it down there so you guys can see that. 105 mile an hour wind at landfall, and it's going right around all the cooler water, though not quite as warm as the water was in the Caribbean. So into the Gulf of Mexico, that water is plenty warm to sustain a hurricane and even a Cat 1, Cat 2, perhaps even a Cat 3. But 4s and 5s, I just don't think there's enough meat and taters out there for it to take in. I've been wrong before, but we'll have to see how things play out. The shelf waters do get a whole lot cooler as you get closer to land. That's also going to help the folks in Louisiana with not dealing with some kind of a major hurricane at landfall. It should help to kind of limit how powerful it is on the way in. Now, it's still going to bring all the rain, a little bit of the wind, and the surge with it. But in terms of having to deal with a straight shot of Cat 4 or 5, again, it looks like that's not necessarily on the table right now. Probability of dealing with tropical storm force wind, as you can imagine, pretty high across parts of Louisiana. For South Mississippi, a 20 to about 40% chance that you deal with tropical storm force wind from east to west. The higher being off to the west, folks in Walthall, Lawrence, and Simpson counties probably dealing with the best chance of getting a tropical storm force wind. What about hurricane force wind? Not so much anymore. Again, because this isn't going to be some kind of a monster 4 in the center of the Gulf of Mexico, or at least that's the forecast right now. The idea is as it weakens, as it moves ashore, the wind field, yes, will spread out, but that core of that strongest wind will not be quite as large, and thus the percent chance that you'd have to deal with that in our area a whole lot lower. You can see how overnight and through the day today, a lot of the modeling has come into incredible agreement about where it will be. Now the question is the timing, when. So, the stronger the storm is, the deeper the convection, the faster it'll go. The weaker it is, the slower it will go, and the rest of the guys are kind of hanging out here in the middle. So, a landfall right now is forecast to be sometime between about 10 a.m. on Friday and about 6 o'clock in the evening on Friday. That's kind of a wide berth between all of the model data in here. The Hurricane Center says sometime early Friday afternoon, and then, of course, it moves ashore. Interesting thing to note, I want to point this out real quick in here. This ridge of high pressure that we've been talking about out here really noses almost all 2/3 of the way across the Gulf of Mexico, and the reason that we're riding around the outside like that with so far off to the west with Delta is because that ridge is nosing. Is nosing itself so far off to the west here. It is interesting to see how much of a vertical, how far north this ridge builds, and when the trough comes in, as to how far north this goes before it starts to curl back off to the east. This is particularly important for parts of South Mississippi, because if this ridge is flatter, it's going to curve around and have a tendency to run a little flatter off to the east, which would increase the chances for higher wind gusts across parts of South Mississippi. If the ridge builds in and instead it builds up higher, then this is going to wrap around that and go a little bit further to the north, which would decrease the chances for tropical storm force wind. Still think we get rain bands in here. Unfortunately, some heavy rain at times, and we can't rule out the possibility of some tropical tornadoes. But nevertheless, that'll be something we'll keep tabs on through about the next 36 hours until landfall, and then we'll get, as we get closer and closer, we get a better idea about what things are going to look like. For now, everywhere gets heavy rain at times, wind gusts to 30 miles an hour. We've curtailed this a little bit. Heavy rain at times, up to an inch of rain, and wind gusts to 40 for a lot of folks. Some places are going to get multiple rounds of heavy rain, up to 2 inches in total, and wind gusts up to 50 miles an hour. A few spots. This is going to be mainly across, again, our western counties. Multiple rounds of heavy rain, maybe even up to 4 inches of rain. Wind gusts up to 60 miles an hour. And for folks across the whole area, this isn't just west, the whole area, but it's only going to happen in a few places, the possibility of a brief tropical tornado. So there's a look at your tropical update brought to you by the folks over there at Pine Belt Gutters and Remodeling for October 7th of 2020.